We are talking all about creative financing. And if you're a wholesaler and you have interest in creative financing, you don't have to go somewhere else for it. And to be honest with you, most wholesalers wind up doing some sort of creative financing. Why not? You're actually going to find them in your regular wholesaling deals. You don't have to do a separate marketing for it. So let's just jump into it and let's talk about creative financing. Now, I have done quite a bit of creative financing. It is not my sole focus. And honestly, when the opportunity strikes, I love to do it. And we are going to talk about how to do a creative financing, the different types of creative financing structures. We can also talk about how to talk to sellers with creative financing. And most importantly, what is your exit strategies and what are the most ideal type of properties and or deals that creative financing works for. So when we talk about creative financing, it is just a strategy. So look at it as like a tool in your tool belt. That's it. And yes, it goes perfectly harmonistically with wholesaling. Wait a minute, Rick. I thought wholesaling was just this or that, meaning I thought it was just you get the deepest price. Yes, but sometimes there's other obligations on the property, and I'll show you how that works. So creative financing. We got to define it. What is it? It seems gotten like really out of whack lately. And all I want to do is talk about the ways to make money with creative financing. For the record, anybody can do a creative financing deal. It does not mean you make money doing it. So all the techniques and the tips I'm going to teach you today are methods that you can actually make money and bring home a check from creative financing. And I'll show you how to do it in the front, in the middle, and at the end. So what is the definition of creative financing? It is basically not a non-traditional means of buying real estate. And if you really want the translation, it means you don't use a traditional bank. Once you remove a bank from it, a piece of real estate is between a buyer and the seller. And this is why you have a contract. And whatever two parties agree to, as long as it's within the confines of the law, you can do it. So many of you think that you are stuck dealing with traditional banks. Now, traditional banks dominate all forms of real estate for obvious reasons because they like to tie their money to an asset. But I'm here to tell you, not every deal needs a bank. So if the buyer and the seller agree to do some sort of creative strategy to sell or buy a property, if the two parties agree and it's within the confines of the law, you can do it. It's simply called creative financing. Now, before we get into creative financing, all real estate has this hard-nosed principle rule. You either get price or you get terms. If you got both, you better check yourself at the door because it is rare. You're not going to get a house 50 cents on the dollar and get seller financing. It can happen, but it's a unicorn. And honestly, you might want to look and go, how am I getting screwed on this deal? The reality is you're either going to get price. You know, in wholesaling, we focus on getting the best deal possible. Remember, what are the key ingredients? Off-market properties, highly motivated sellers. You will not get a good wholesaling deal without those two formulas into play. Now, today we're talking about what if I can't get a deep discount? Is there any way to do some other method to take a deal down? And that's what we're talking about is creative financing. And I'm here to tell you, the key to creative financing is stay within your wholesale operations. And when those opportunities pop up, you take advantage of them. So many people on these live streams, you're looking for the answer, the shortcut, the wholesaling. Number one, if you're looking for a shortcut, you don't need to look any further. You're going to fail miserably. There is no shortcut to wholesaling. That's just like if you're in kindergarten, like, hey, how can I just cut straight to the job market? I don't even want to go through schooling. Probably not even a bad idea. It's not going to happen. You have to go through it. So anyone who tells you creative financing is that way you don't have to fight with all the wholesalers. If you don't understand wholesaling, you'll probably get killed in creative finance because you don't understand how the basic math in real estate works. And if you think wholesaling is hard, that's probably your biggest problem right there. So stop. If you think creative finance is going to be easier, I'm here to tell you, you're going to have the opposite problem. You're probably going to way overpay for a property and think you're going to make a ton of money in 5-10 years down the road and deal with a huge mess. So I prefer you understand and study wholesaling first. You understand the fundamentals. You know why? Because that's what's going to teach you actually how to talk to sellers. Once you understand where the values are, what the price points need to be, when a creative financing solution comes up, you're going to be more educated. You're going to be a better communicator to your sellers. And you'll understand how to take the deal down to make it a win for you and a win for your seller and all parties involved. Without the fundamentals of wholesaling, you don't understand this. And I find a lot of new creative financing people that want to skip wholesaling. They just go out and they hunt for subject to deals, lease options, seller financing. And honestly, you can't hunt if you don't even know what you're looking for. And that's the real problem. So we have the age old thing of price or terms. We focused on price. That's predominantly what I do. But let's talk about if we switch the terms. And more importantly, when is this right? When is a creative financing deal right? And I'm here to tell you, if you do wholesaling enough, you will automatically know the answer to this. Why do I say this? Sorry. Because it's the truth. And here's the simple answer. I'm gonna like blow most creative financing courses right out of the water, right, with this statement right here. When it's right, there is usually no other alternative for the seller to solve their problem. And this is more apparent than ever in subject to deals. And what do I mean by that? Most of these times they get on your list. However, maybe it's a code violation, maybe it's a delinquent tax, and then they bought a property maybe a couple years ago and they just owe too much on the property. So they can't take the discount even though the house might have issues. And then what do? So they've already talked to a realtor. They've talked to 5 or 6 wholesalers. They've talked to a contractor. What are they going to do? They can do a short sale, which is probably going to affect their credit. And most people don't even qualify for short sales because you have to have some sort of life event to qualify it. Contrary to popular opinion, you don't automatically get approved for a short sale. If you have not lost your job, you have not had some sort of tragedy in your family, which is what the bank is looking for, they are not going to relieve you of the financial debt of that property. And unfortunately, that's the case to most people. And guys, for you doing out there short sales and you're going to make up an excuse for them, it's flat out fraud. Don't do it because it's going to bite you in the butt in the long run. So what does the seller do if for them to sell the house, they got to bring like $25,000 to the closing table to pay for the realtor, pay for the closing cost, and maybe for a few repairs on the house that they promised to get the deal done? What do? Honestly, the best deals I've ever done in creative financing, particularly subject to, is when they've exhausted every other option. That's when you are a great fit. And honestly, they will do the deal with you like being super excited because you just saved them 25 grand. Now, not saying that the deal is going to work, but this instance, that what I'm showing you right here in this video, this is the best creative financing deals because if they could solve it with a realtor, with a wholesaler, they would have already done it. So why not be the wholesaler that switches caps? You tried to buy it at a discount, find out that you just don't have much equity into it. And now you're going to dig in and see if you can possibly help them out. And guys, this is the key to creative financing. I promise you at the end of this, we'll talk about strategies on how to talk to sellers about this because I find most wholesalers are really awkward when it comes to this. And honestly, it's just part of your final conversation. Remember, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to help people out, the best way to make the most amount of money is find the biggest problems and solve it. And that's all we're doing in wholesaling, no different in creative financing. So I want to typically be their last solution, meaning they've tried everything else. Because here's the reality. If you try to go to at this one, if you try to attack them with creative financing first, before the realtor hit them, before all the wholesalers hit them and all the other family members hit them, you're just going to waste your time. So what I want to do is have them hit a brick wall on every one of them. And every one of these people tell them, you got to bring money to the table. You got to bring money to the table. Oh, I'm sorry. You got to bring money to the table. Oh, I'm sorry. You have to do a short sale. You're going to have to lie and make up something. And then maybe I can get you free of it. And they go, no, I don't want to do that. And so now when I come about, maybe it got referred to me, maybe a realtor sent me the deal. This is how I do a lot of deals. Maybe it came from my own marketing. Now you already know the basic mechanics of a motivated seller and how to talk to them. After this, it's an easy conversation. We'll do this at the end, I promise. So what do I look for? So now that you know, I want you to understand this. You can't just attack people. And if you hit them with creative financing right off the bat, and by the way, here's a strategy that a lot of would-be wholesalers are doing. The same people do novations. So what if I paid you top dollar and I paid you significantly more than a wholesaler? Would you do the deal with me? If you're going to start out with that line, I guarantee you won't last in this business because you can't do it. You're not actually going to make money. You're going to get deals, you'll get creative deals, but they're not going to make any money because if you're just going to outbid everybody, I don't know how you're going to make money on it, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what do we look for in a creative financing deal? And in my 20 plus years of doing this, there are some key components. And if you stick to them, you'll find the best deal. By the way, not everybody that needs to do a subject to a lease option or a seller finance is a great candidate for a creative financing deal. It's just the truth. I like to be the last option, period, because I get zero resistance. They're 110% on board. And honestly, it makes sense. Like, I've tried everything else. I got stuck. This is where I'm at. So I'm going to do this. Well, there's not really order. I basically have two rules. Actually, and I'm talking about the physical characteristics of the property. I'm not talking about the financials because I'm doing that separately. So what type of property is ideal for a creative financing deal? Well, number one, occasionally you might be living in these properties yourself, but for the most part, you're looking to make money off of them, either long-term rentals, either you're going to flip them or you're going to do some sort of option, and you're going to be, I'll explain details because there's a lot of ways to do this. I don't want to like screw it up. So number one, you got to make sure the property's in a desirable area. If you do creative financings out in the middle of nowhere with a population of like 10,000 people, you're going to have a lot less options and you're going to have a lot longer holding costs for these deals. Why? Because if it's ugly and the house looks bad, nobody wants to pay you for it. And if anything, you're going to have to offer a deep discount to get this property moved. And for that reason, that's one of the reasons you've got to understand, you got to be in a desirable area. And no matter what happens in real estate, they always talk about location, location, location. It is important in this one. And if you miss this part and you get a property in the middle of nowhere and there's not a lot of desire, you're going to have to chase people and reward them financially to take on this headache for you. And those are the ones that you're not going to get top dollar for. And I don't want to mess with those properties. I've owned them before and they never quite work out. So if you're in an area that's not desirable and there's a small population and it's really ugly, meaning aesthetically, it just doesn't look right, you're going to take a hit on these type of properties. And you need to be careful on those types of properties. Remember, you're a wholesaler. You can selectively choose which properties this is going to fit. The reality is the property usually winds up choosing us. That's number one. Number two, really important one, they got to have little repairs. Little repairs is the key. The less the repairs on a creative financing deal, the more options you have for that property. Meaning your exit strategy is completely wide open. You understand that? Your exit strategy is completely wide open. Once you start stacking up huge repair bills, meaning it needs major rehab, it becomes more and more critical that you turn that property over to replace the cash and be profitable. So when you're looking at these types of properties, I'm not saying you can't do a creative financing on a rehab project, but you will have to cash it out. You're going to have to refinance it. And guys, you're in a market refinancing, which we'll talk at the end of this. It's suicide right now. I mean, you're at 8.25% doing a refi, unless you are making significant money. And by the way, I don't focus on interest rates, but once they get above 7%, you got to start paying attention because it's a pretty big number and it's going to hurt the cash flow of the property. So the one thing you've got to understand, if you can get properties with little to no damage in repairs, so what's my definition of little? If it takes you more than 2 weeks to get that property like rental ready or end user ready, you're probably going to struggle with it because that means it's going to cost money. And the more money means it's going to cost more time. So basically paintbrush, pressure cleaners, maybe appliances, and maybe a carpet or two in some of the rooms. Why do I say carpet? Because carpet's fast. You put down hardwood flooring, tile and stuff. It just takes time. You got to get stuff measured. You've got to go buy the material. You've got to set an appointment, do an installer. I mean, it's literally 2 to 3 weeks if you're moving fast. So ideally, something you can get done in less than 2 weeks. And in the perfect world, you get it done in less than 7 days. Why? Because time is money. And the more repairs it's going to need, the less options you're going to. If you got to go in and do $30,000, $40,000 of repairs, how long is it really going to take you to get it completely ready? And number two is, how are you going to fund this? Because you're not getting a $50,000 down payment up front with it. So we will go through this in the exit strategies, but you have to be aware. My favorite thing in the world is to find a property that needs little to no repairs because I know I can get the highest and best use out of it. I will still take properties that need full rehabs that people want to do seller financing options subject to, but I know I have to cash that out to get it completely funded. And we'll talk about that in detail towards the end, I promise. So little to no repairs is the key. If you want to know what little is, if you can get it done in less than 2 weeks and typically $5K or less, maybe 10 if you're like talented and you know what to do, but 10 is going to cost you a lot of time. And every month goes by, another payment goes by, that means more money out of your pocket. So you got to keep that in mind. So let's talk about the types of creative finance deals. So you can cut this as like many ways as you want. There's really only 3 types of finance deals. To be honest, it is infinite because whatever the buyer and the seller agrees on, you can do. But most deals follow under these 3 categories. And let me just kind of go over with them. And I'm going to tell you when they're best to put in play, and why the seller would want to do that type of deal. Because that's everyone always asks, Rick, why would someone want to do a creative finance offer? Honestly, it's typically because they've tried everything else and they can't get it to work. And sellers get stuck in their own damn head. And that's the challenging part with it. So types of creative financing deals. Number 1, subject to. I didn't say there's no such thing as sub to. That is a submarine, in my opinion. It is subject to. Okay. So all you guys that use your slang, sub to, and all that, if you go to the title company, if you talk to other people like this, most people aren't going to know what you're talking about. So please use correct English. Subject to. If you go in the title company, I'm doing a sub to, either they think you're going to Publix or you're going to Subway to get a sub, or they think like you don't know what you're talking about. Subject to. Everybody repeat with me. Subject to. Now, what is a subject to? It's exactly what it says. So if I say sub to, I don't even know what that means. Subject to is when you take over the existing debt on the properties, any obligations, and you basically take the seller's place for it. 9 times out of 10, it winds up being a mortgage. So if somebody had a $200,000 mortgage on a property and their payment was $1,500 a month, then you take over that position. So if $190,000 left on that note, and you do a subject to, and say you were buying it for $200,000, the seller would get $10,000 equity cash out, and you would take on the $190,000 debt with the $1,500 payment. You have to pay it every month to the bank. And now there's 2 types of subject tos, to get real technical here. One's the way I just did it, and honestly, I call it kind of like a banded subject to, because you don't announce it to the servicing bank. Honestly, you really want to avoid announcing it at all, because that could trigger what we call a due on sale clause, which is just a fancy word for the bank saying, pay me back. You violated the terms of the mortgage. By the way, one of the terms of the mortgage, everybody knows this up front, is when you transfer ownership. So when you deed it in your name or your company's name from the previous owner, if you don't notify the bank, basically it says in the mortgage, once the deed's transferred, that the mortgage is basically null and void. But most banks, as long as they're getting their money, they really don't say a whole lot. The reality is some of them have software programs, and with AI, this might become more predominant. They can tell when you transaction on the deed. If there's any history of delinquency on that, they typically want you to pay it off. Now, I've had a couple due on sale clause, but honestly, they're very like 1% to 2%. And it is a risk doing the deal, and you have to have a backup plan for it. But that's why you want to buy a good creative financing deal, because if you have a due on sale clause get executed on you and the numbers are tight, you're most likely going to get killed. Why? Because you got to refinance the entire property, cash it out, or sell it. And you're going to have to move it pretty quickly, because the bank's going to ascertain penalties, because they will not take payment from you, because they don't believe you're the owner and they won't recognize you. So that's a subject to. I call it a bandit subject to, because you don't announce it to the servicing bank. The second type of subject to is what's called an assumable mortgage. And it's actually built in the paperwork where someone can assume the mortgage. Now, why would someone do that? If you do that, you have to qualify just like the regular owner did with the bank. So they're going to run your credit. They want to see your W-2 pay history. They want to see your debt to income ratio. And they want to make sure that you have paid all your bills on time and you're in great shape. And most people don't want to do it because, let's face it, as a wholesaler, most of you guys are getting started. You're not going to qualify for these types of mortgages. To be honest with you, assumable mortgages are rare. They were extremely popular in the 80s. They just aren't popular anymore. So most of the subject to you see that's talked about amongst all the wholesalers, they typically just take it over and they don't tell the bank. Is that right or wrong? Honestly, I'm not here to support any bank, so I could care less. Just understand you do have some risk when you do it. So an assumable mortgage allows you to take your place, but you have to fill out an entire application and you have to be underwritten. And guys, it can be painful in that sense. So what is a subject to? Just as I said earlier, the assumption take over the current mortgage or obligation. That's it. It's really straightforward. Now, everybody says, why on heck would someone want to do a subject to? Why would the seller want to do it? I understand why the buyer want to do it. Well, think about it. Say they bought the property for $200,000 and they financed $195,000, and then maybe they're in the year 2. Maybe dad lost his job and they called a realtor, says, listen, we can't afford this anymore. We're going to move back in with mom. we need to get this property sold, right? Right thing to do. So the realtor goes, yeah, I can probably get you like 204. Guy goes, great, $5,000 profit. Wrong, right? You got closing costs. And you got that pesky little thing called a realtor at 6%. 200,000, they're going to owe $12,000. So in reality, he's going to owe about $10,000 to $12,000 at the closing table. Crap, what do I do? Oh, I'm going to call one of these We Buy Houses guys. They're going to buy it real fast for cash, right? And that's when you and me go out there and we talk to the homeowner and go, and you instantly recognize, go, listen, I get the position you're in, but like, what do you want to do about it? And here's what happens. They're going to go through the realtor. They're going to go through the wholesaler. Then they're going to consider a short sale. 9 times out of 10, they don't qualify for short sales. So you have to have a qualifying event. And by the way, just losing your job is no longer a single qualifying event. So the bank wants their money back. Banks don't care about people. I'm sorry, as much as you see these sweet commercials between all these banks, they just care about getting paid at the end of the day. So why do you think they make short sales any easier? The only time they had a heart for people was in 2009 through 11. And that's because so many bad mortgages were written. They had to figure out how to alleviate these mortgages. And that was the solution to it. Now, that is a subject two. Let's move on to the next one. Seller financing. Crap, Rick, what the hell is that? That sounds like just regular creative financing. No, seller financing is when the seller decides, I will be the bank for you. Now, I know what you're thinking. I get why the buyer wants to do it. Why on earth would the seller want to do a seller financing? What's the benefit? And I'm here to give you the predominant answer on this. Let me put this down. The predominant answer on why sellers wants to do this, these are people that typically have the property free and clear. And 9 times out of 10, these properties are listed on the multiple listing service, and they put a ridiculous price on it. And they have this price and they never want to budge from it. You guys know exactly who I'm talking about. These are people that are absolutely perfect for the price versus terms. Hey, Mr. Seller, what if I can get you that price? Are you open to a creative solution? Shut your mouth. These people are the ones that I get the most. They typically have it on the market 3, 6, 9 months. I've seen a year. They're free and clear. They don't let realtors data influence them. If they want 230 for the house, they will sit there for years on 230. And then after they get tired, after 6 months to a year, and someone like me who has a very productive conversation and gets them talking and engaged, it's something that we'll consider. The second advantage of it for the seller is a lot of these people want to defer their taxable liability. So a lot of times, if somebody owns it as an investment property, they don't want to pay all the capital gains. They don't want to like raise their tax bracket up like radically. And so they want to do a seller financing to stretch it out. I've done this with 9 people in their 90s. When they get in the older ages, they want to defer taxes as long as humanly possible because they don't want to pay it while they're alive. That's just the bottom line truth. And I'm okay with that. If they do that, that's fine. Let me find a way to do it. Just like in wholesaling, if you can find out what your seller wants to accomplish, it is your job to find a way and see if you can make it work, because you are going to get paid proportionally to the amount of problems that you solve. And if you can solve a seller's problem, just like I said, just like this, either a tax problem or Mr. Seller, I see you're holding on this price and I respect it. What if I could give you that price? Would you be open to a creative solution? And that's it. That's the only way I have the conversation with them. Remember, I've always told you cannot make people sell you their house. This is not a car dealership where 200 people are walking in today and your job is to sell 15 cars. It doesn't work that way in wholesaling. You have to find people that have off-market properties. In this case, you could do on-market because you're going to pay them the most. And number 2, they have to be motivated. Why would this seller be motivated? They want to avoid a tax liability, or they want to get their price, but they got to give me terms. I'm not going to give them price, and they're never going to give you price, a deep discounted price in terms. It's always going to be a seesaw effect. And once you understand that, you understand why people are going to do that. So let me update this here. Yes, we are going to be taking lives at the end. So, and if you have specific questions about creative financing, I promise that when I'm done with this part, I will go over it. So I love seller financing because they're extremely cooperative people. All they want you to do is honor their agreement. Now, a seller financing, it's usually they have the property free and clear, which means they don't own any debt on it. And then basically they're going to issue a mortgage. A mortgage is attached to the property depending on what state you're in. It could be, I'm not going to get in the mechanicals of trustees and all this stuff, but basically a mortgage they're going to tie to the property or a deed of trust. And the other one's a note. That is the personal obligation that you have signed that holds you personally liable to pay off that note. Once the note's paid off, they release the mortgage. And that's why banks are so happy to loan us money at 8% these days. So because if you don't pay them, they can leverage your asset. And this is basically it on seller financing. I do them all the time. And honestly, as long as you pay your obligation, most of them don't have an issue with it. And a lot of people are like, why do we have to do the paperwork? Because I wouldn't trust you either. I don't know you. So you're going to do a mortgage and a note. Your title company can handle the entire thing. It's very, very simple to do. And you can still get a title policy with it. Why would you get a title policy? Because you need to ensure you're getting a free and clear title. So the third one is basically a lease option. And honestly, of all of them, probably my most desirable strategy, because in my opinion, it's the most creative. And number two, it is the least amount of risk for both parties involved. And I don't want to sit here and go in like deep mechanics of a lease option. So I'm going to give you the layman's terms, because I could do an entire show on that. I could do an entire week on lease options. I love lease options. I think they're absolutely amazing. But basically, let me sum up a lease option. When you find a really good property in a desirable area, doesn't need a lot of work, it is best and highest use is always going to be a lease option. I'm biased to this because I've done so many. And so basically, you're optioning the property. You give someone between $1 and $1 million. Never going to give $1 million. $1 is a little bit low. And then basically, you are going to sublease it to a rent-to-own type of person. And long as they meet their obligation and give you a big downstroke up front, you work with them to buy the house. Now, there's two trains of thoughts in the lease option. Lease option. The first one is the absolute wrong mindset if you do this. And if somebody's taught you to do this, scrap it now, because it's going to make you a really bad person. If your goal is to do lease options and take advantage of people that can never ever afford to buy a home, or have a very, very bad credit track, or a very inconsistent job income track, and maybe they got a windfall, maybe they got 10 grand. They go, Rick, I'll give you 10 grand and I'll pay you 2 grand a month. If they've shown on paper they're most likely going to fail and it's terrible, please don't do it. I'm telling you guys, there is a significant population out there in the creative financing field that goes and mid to low incoming houses, and they jack the price so high up on these, the numbers are never going to work, and the lease optionee is completely vulnerable and they're going to get killed on it. Guess what? I know people in this business in the local South Florida market, they'll do this 5, 6, 7 times with one property. And if you miss one payment, they are likely even worse than the bank. I'm here to tell you, when you do lease options, you are going to have some issues. People are going to miss payments. People are going to get behind. My job is always to work with them because I want them to own that home. I don't want to take it back. I don't want to fix it up. And it was like, oh, you'll make more money. No. Then you become a property manager. So if you do the lease option strategy, find people that love the absolute house. Make sure it's affordable and it makes sense. And when they have one hiccup, work with them. Don't try to run them under the bus. And I see it all the time. Why these people call me like, I need to sell this house. I'm like, you realize it's a $200,000 house. You signed a contract for $310,000. Like it's not even going to slightly appraise it. And then if you set the price too high, you set the homeowner, the would-be homeowner, up for failure, and you know it going into it. And honestly, if they press the case hard enough, they could probably go after you for fraud because you induced them into basically a bait and switch scheme. And you're going to find this in low to mid-income areas all the time. There's people that I've seen guys that have hundreds of houses that do this and they brag about it. And I'm telling you, every lease option I've did, unless people walk away from the house and do a midnight move out, I have a 95% success rate. Every now and then there's someone who just does really bad things and they need to go. But if you constantly, so I had someone recently took care of the house beautifully, painted it, had one of those beautiful custom lawns. Every time I drove by, you could just tell the pride in the house. Well, the guy lost his job. He's like, should I just give you the house back now? You're going to take it from me? I said, no, what's the plan? He goes, what do you mean? I go, what's your plan going forward? Are you going to get another job? Or he goes, I just assume you wouldn't work with me. I go, listen, I'm reasonable. Let's just take it month by month. And then you go concentrate this month, get a job. Well, in 2 months, he got a great job, got paid more money. And then 2 years later, he cashed me out. And he was scared he was going to walk like, hey, I can't pay you. I can't do this. And he made all the money back and everything. And I just want to create a win-win situation. So I'm just, please, I implore you, there's tons of great books out there on lease options. There's people that teach lease options. Lease options work in desirable neighborhoods for nice, pretty houses. They do not work on rehabs. You cannot do a lease option on a rehab. It does, the math will never work out because you're going to be upside down in payments on it. Okay. Well, I will go through, I'm going to do a follow-up one on this and go through deep math on this stuff. But I tell you, lease options, the third thing I love about the lease options is the speed they're done. You can have the whole thing done in 30 days or less, and it works out real good. So, okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the number, and then we'll go into more and more as we do this. So finding cash in a creative financing deal. This is the part that you need to understand, because if you don't understand this part, the rest is just a human waste of time. Okay. So many people are so eager to do creative financing, they don't know how they're even going to make money. They just want to do it. It's like, I want to tell everyone I did creative finance. Well, in wholesaling, if you're successful, what happens at the end of the transaction? You get paid. The new standard for creative financing with people who teach it is like, I did a creative financing deal. It doesn't mean you made any money. Maybe you bought the right deal, but like there's so many things that go into creative financing. And this is why it's not a strategy you should start out and skip wholesaling. Because if you can't grasp wholesaling, I promise you creative financing, it could get you in big trouble quick right away. So let's talk about finding the cash. So it's like kind of finding it like Nemo. We got to find the cash. So number one, before you find the cash, you are going to have to determine your exit strategy. Let me give you an example. Say you get a lead in wholesaling and all of a sudden they just owe too much. They owe like 90% of the mortgage balance. And guess what? They started gutting the house and doing a reno on it. And they ran out of money. And they go, Rick, man, I need you to sell you this house now. And I kind of did the numbers. And I agree, if the reno got done, that there would be a decent profit there. But that reno could take 6 months. It's going to take experts coming in, and let's face it, these DIY people, you're not going to get far with it. So what do? I am the last solution for them because everybody else wants them to pay. I tell you what, Mr. Seller, I will go ahead and take over your mortgage, your obligation. You step out of here. You don't owe anyone a dime, and I'll give you $2,500. Now, the number I give them is insignificant. It could be $2,000. It could be $5,000. I've done these things for as little as $1. Okay. Here's the challenge I want you to focus on is the thing needs $60,000 in rehab. So how am I going to fund that $60,000? There's no one who's going to downstroke me 60 grand on this type of house. 25 is the most I would get. And I'm not willing to carry that other 35 for the next 3 or 5 years. Okay. We're not going to a bank. We'll talk about the banks at the very end. What do? These deals need to be turned over. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. Unless you have a huge war chest and you can afford to carry numbers like that, you are not at that part in your career yet to take on that risk. You can't, okay? So in this instance, Rick, what do I do? It's simply, you're going to go to your cash rehab buyers like you normally do. But here's the caveat. You can now offer them financing for your deal. Why would you do that? Number one, hard money is expensive. It's going to 15 to 16% right now, 3 to 5 points up front. So if someone borrowed $200,000, they paid 5 points. That's a $10,000 fee. You could basically offer them financing. Heck, it's not your money. You're just picking back off the subject to loan you took over, and you can actually charge the rehabber more money. Why? Because he doesn't have to waste $25,000 in financing costs, but you can charge a premium for doing this. So if this was typically going to sell for $220, and say you bought it for $200 and you're going to make a $20,000 assignment, as long as he gives you the money up front to cover the money you were going to give to the homeowner to take over the subject to deal, everything above that is profit. So if he goes, okay, I'll give you $35,000 up front, you basically walk away with a huge chunk, and then you can still have money on the back end when he cashes it out, because you're basically the hard money. And maybe that loan's at 5% and you can charge him 9 or 10%. Maybe you just don't charge him the points. So the difference when I do that, Rick, why would they go with me over a traditional hard money person? I don't charge them points. I give them a decent interest rate. And honestly, I've already underwritten the deal. I know exactly what it needs and I can get it done. And then I'm going to put 5 or 10 grand on the back end. So when it cashes out, that is an incredible use. But when you have large expenses that need to be done, you have to cash it out. Don't go to the bank to do that. Don't do the bird method. It does not work in this current market. It is suicide to do that stuff. Work with your cash buyer and create an opportunity for him. Listen, If I don't have to go to hard money and it's a good one and you'll make it even faster, I'm all in. Do they really care where the money's loaned to? Remember, it's just the money for the purchase. It's not the rehab. What's my risk? It's almost nothing because he or she's putting in all the expenses. They're doing all the upgrades. They might put 100 grand into it. They have to finish the project. And I hope they take a long time because then I just get monthly payments. And so I get cash flow up front, I get cash flow in the middle, I get cash flow at the end. I'll go in detail in another video because I could do every one of these. I could do this stuff all day. So you have to determine your exit strategy. Example number 2, if you're going to do a lease option, you found a really nice house. Maybe it's in a neighborhood you live in. It's like the guy's moving out of the country. He got caught cheating on his wife. He's the only one on the mortgage. She doesn't care. He's like, listen, give me 10 grand and you can just take over the mortgage. I'm done. So say we agree on 10 grand. I know what you're saying, Rick, how am I going to do this? I don't have 10 grand. Here's the key. It's not your 10 grand. So basically I tell you what, I will give you 10 grand as soon as I find a suited, basically in buyer for your properties. And he says, how long did that take? I go, typically 45 days at max. This is the reason why I want houses that are ready to go. So maybe I take a long weekend, I get a handyman in there, I paint, I clean, I do the yard, I put a sign in the yard, I put it all over the internet, and then basically owner financing, no bank qualifying. And I put out that ad and I promise you, you will get buried, especially in this market. You not only get buried, you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of people begging you to give you this property. And what can you do? So if the market rate for that property is $300,000, you can typically charge $319,000. Why? Because you're solving the biggest piece of the puzzle, which is the owner financing. Now, the 10 grand, what do we do with that? Well, here's the deal is every property has a price point to get in. So the first thing I'm going to calculate it, what would a renter basically pay to get into this property? So if the rent was $2,500 a month, which depending on where you are is pretty light, they do first, last, and security. That's $7,500. So if a renter has to bring $7,500, you should get at least double that, at least double. And that is the minimum. Do you see how that math works? If I got to give the seller 10 grand and say I asked for 15 grand, I would put $5,000 up front in my pocket. That is a win-win creative financing solution. But a lot of people are teaching in the business, oh, I'm going to give 30 grand and then they're going to give me 20 grand. Well, that means you just lost $10,000. Now, did you lose it? You physically lost it. Maybe it's on paper, but how many of those can you sustain? I have never done one where I've gone upside down. I have ones I do now because I know the long-term play, but in the beginning, most of you can't afford $20,000 and $30,000 risks, much less alone $10,000 risk. Okay. So if I know the house is in a good area, it needs minimal repair, maybe a cleaning lady and a pressure cleaner, and he wants 10 grand, I am all in. I'm going to make it as easy as possible. I'm not even going to negotiate with him because if he'll sign the deal right there, I know I'm going to make 5,000 with my eyes shut. Now, that was the minimum. Ideally, you collect 10 to 20. Ideally, you would profit $10,000 to $20,000 on these types of deals. But we have to talk about how we do these deals. So once you determine your strategy, so I just gave you 2 examples, right? One needed heavy rehab, one was imperfect in a great neighborhood. One I can move with great speed. The other one I have to move with speed with cash buyers. And I showed you how to make such a unique offer that it's not your typical deal you offer. And that's why I say, go, listen, John, typically I offer you deals that I have to cash out and you have to have them done in 10 days. This one's pretty cool because I might be able to give you some self-funding if you can come up with a nice chunk of money. And he'll always say, how much money? You know what you say? What's the most you can put down? And shut your mouth. So what if he goes, I can put 50,000 down, Rick? I'm like, okay. It's just a math problem. I can go through the details. I'd rather have a whiteboard to do all this stuff on it. So let's talk about the profit centers on where to go. So basically there's 3 ways on any creative financing deal that you get paid, and you have to understand them. You cannot go through this part of the exercise until you have determined your exit strategy. I'm not going to wet my whistle here, guys. If you have questions about creative financing, put it in the comments. And I promise you, I'm almost done here. I'm going to put it in here. So you have the upfront fee. This is where a lot of wholesalers don't understand this. If you got to give that seller 10 grand, you better make sure you're getting at least that or more. So I always try to do the double down number. So figure out what the rents are, first, last, and security, and double it. So first, last, and security is 5-6 grand. Then you need to get 10 to 12 grand up front, assuming you don't have a lot of repairs. Because guys, the reality is that guy's waiting for his money. Is it your money? No, you're getting it from your end buyer, but you can't make him wait forever. That's why it's important, if you don't have a lot of repairs there, is to get those numbers moving as fast as you can, because the clock is ticking. You want to get the whole thing done in 30 to 45 days. So the upfront fee, this is the part you take home a profit. So if you took an assignment fee from a wholesale deal, this would be your basically wholesale fee up front. Okay. And it's just one part of the strategy. And honestly, this is the least amount of money you'll ever make. But the beauty of it is a chunk of cash to infuse in your business so you can keep marketing, keep your wholesaling operation going, and continue. And where the real money is in wholesaling and finding motivated sellers. The second one is going to be the monthly cash flow. And then this is the difference of what the fixed cost on whatever you're paying the seller or subject to, or whatever you agreed on the lease option, and what you're getting from your end buyer. Now, everyone's like, well, what's the ideal spread? Make it large. Stuff happens in life. Example, I took a property over in 2006, 2008, 9 hit. Rents got cut by 50% in my market. I went upside down. Actually, it was so bad, I wound up deeding the house back to the owner because it was the right thing to do. I could not make the numbers work, and there was such a race for rents going down that I just overbought on the property. You can screw up a creative financing deal. I've done it. And the purpose of this video is to have you avoid it. So cash flow. So if I'm paying this person $1,200 a month and I'm getting $1,800, that's $600. Will that survive any type of market fluctuations? Increase in the tax roll? Obviously, insurance increases. It should. Where does it get tight? Once you start to get below 300, you could be in big trouble. If it's 150 bucks, I guarantee you're going to wind up and you're going to have problems with it. So I like to have big spreads. Sorry, that's right. I want to make money up front. I want to make money every month. And then the last part of it is when you go to dispo the asset, you should be getting a final payout. And this should be the biggest of all the checks you get. So you get one good solid check up front. You get a monthly residual that it's not completely passive, because you do have to keep an eye on the asset and make sure. And remember, you want to help make sure your seller buys the property from you. So you want to make sure that you encourage them to make you payments. And the last part is, you have to help them refinance the property, basically to cash it out with a traditional mortgage. They have to keep their job going. They have to build their credit, not make stupid purchases. And they have to, most importantly, work with a mortgage broker. Now, imagine so I have a property coming up here at the end of this year that they need to cash out. And they've already expressed to me, Rick, at 8%, I don't think I can do it. I said, give me your solution. Now, I'm not in control of what the interest market rates are. Everybody takes that by chance, and I can't control it. But do you want to extend it another year? If you want to extend it another year, I need $5,000 up front. And I'll keep the same rate, because I have to be compensated, because I have obligations too, and I can't just do it. Now, I might do it if they've been paid on time and making all money. This is an example of working with your buyers. You can't just keep running them under the bus. I don't understand investors that give people a property and they said, my goal is to just take it back from them. They're never going to be able to afford it. In my opinion, that's fraud. And I think it's a wrong way to do this business. You should want to help people out. Who the hell wants to take a house back from someone? It's bad enough to evict renters. Trust me, it's bad. But to take it from like a homeowner, it's painful, guys. And you don't want that. So the last part we have to do is we have to understand the math of any type of creative financing deal. I'm going to give you some basic terminologies here. I apologize if you call it basic. Hang with me, because I want to give you as much information as you can. So you have to understand the math. So you have to understand the upfront cash flow, the monthly cash flow, and the disposition of the asset. So when you have a seller that possibly wants to work with you on this, and you know you're the only fit for them, the first thing I'm going to do is ask for the particulars of the property. How much does it cost a month to run? The insurance, the taxes, absolutely everything. The best place to get this information is just to get a copy of their mortgage statement, okay? And you're looking for what we call PITI. So let me run through this real quick, because a lot of people mix this up. This is just a cute little acronym for principal, which is so if you got a loan for $200,000, your principal is $200,000. The interest, this is the interest rate on the loans, because you got to pay interest on the balance. You also, the other T is for taxes. The next T is for insurance. This is kind of self-explanatory. So principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. You want to know, now some banks, if they put down a small amount, all that is wrapped together. And some people pay their own taxes and their own insurance because they put down a larger payment amount. And some people have tied up in this called PMI, which is basically an insurance that protects the bank in case they default on the loan, which jacks up the payment even higher. So if you have like a crazy expensive cash flow property It's because they bought it with little to no money and they have basically PMI insurance. And shoot, I even forget. They actually changed the name on it recently. But basically, you're going to pay a $200 or $300 premium a month to protect the bank. They take out an extra insurance policy on you, and they really strict on you. So when you guys get the mortgage statement, one of the most important things to look when they took out the mortgage. Rick, why is this important? Number one, it's amazing. I've done deals. Ready for this? Now, most of them are going to be 30-year mortgages. Now, when you have a 30-year mortgage, and someone's paid at least 8 or 9 years into it, more money goes to the principal, less money goes to the interest. This is the amortization of any type of bank loan. Look it up online. I'm not going to the details in it. I once did one where they only had a 15-year loan. And check this out, right? They were 7 years into it. By year 8, 50% of the payment of the PITI was going towards principal. So I owned the house, and in 7 years, I had it fully paid off. I walked away with like 400 grand on it. Why? Because I paid attention. And I'm here to tell you, it was a tight deal in the beginning. And if I did not look that it was a 15-year loan, I would have missed one of my golden opportunities. It came from a probate deal. It was phenomenal. Like, Rick, why would they do it? It came from a probate. They didn't care. Now, I had to come up with $25,000. But it was more than worth it because all the financing was built in. It was a 4% interest rate. It was phenomenal. So look at how many years are left on the mortgage. If it's in year 1 or 2, there's not much savings here. But understanding every payment that's made, and who's making the payment, guys? You're not. Your end user is if you do it right. And so they're paying down the mortgage every month. So hopefully the value's going up, the mortgage is going down, and you could own the property in 10 years and have a huge windfall. That's how you get really wealthy in real estate. So just to be aware of that. So the last thing is, I'm going to put this up here because we need to talk about this. You need to be aware of refinancing pitches as creative financing. What do I mean by this? Creative financing means you do the deal without a bank. So there is creative ways you can work with a bank. If you guys haven't heard of the BRRRR method, it's basically you refinance the property. I've done it before, and I've done it in really low interest rates for like projects that I'm completely vested in it. But here's what I'm talking about. If someone comes to you and says, hey, listen, Rick, I can buy your property, but here's what we're going to do. I know it's worth $300,000, but we're going to write a contract for like $150,000. And they start doing this magic math, and then they bring in a mortgage broker. That's not creative financing, guys. It's called fraud. Okay. Anytime you bring in a bank, if you do not materialistically disclose all relative facts to the transaction, you are committing mortgage fraud. It is a federal offense, and it is a crime you can be punished with jail time. So I'm just here to tell you, if you're going to misrepresent the value to an outside bank and you two parties go along with it, the buyer and seller, you're both guilty. I see somebody pitched me the other day, Rick, here's what we can do. Here's what we're going to do. And they're like, no, we're going to sign a contract for this. And then it'll appraise for this. And then what I'm going to do is refinance it. When I refinance, I'm going to pay you all this back. It is flat out 100% mortgage fraud. You don't believe me? Watch the people they're going after all the time doing this. Once you bring in an outside bank, it is not creative financing anymore. It's creative in your head only, because someone's going to get hurt. And when the bank, if that loan goes in default and the bank does any type of research, they're going to usually find out someone got screwed and somebody took advantage of this scheme. And then usually there's this cute little name with it. You can use this technique, you can use that technique. Guys, I'm just telling you, you have to have common sense. When you bring in a third-party bank, if you do not disclose all material facts, you are at risk, okay? You guys know of a certain person right now who's sitting in trial that used to be our president. They're actually going after him for this. So if they could go after him, they could go after anybody for this. If you intentionally commit, say, you with the buyer and the seller, I promise you, when an investigator comes out, that seller or buyer is going to run you under the bus every time. And I see that. So I've been presented with this in the last 90 days, probably 5 times. Hey, we're going to try this technique. I go, I don't understand. If the property's worth 300, why do you want me to tell the bank it's worth 150 or like 200? No, I'm going to refinance it. We're going to have a separate contract. No. Once you have a separate private agreement and a contract, you are defrauding a regulated federal banking industry, and you're going to get nailed for it. Guys, don't do this. I'm telling you, you're wasting time when you do that. And whoever comes up with these strategies, I think the intention was correct there. Some people put their own spin on it, and they think they're going to like be cute and creative. And I promise you, when you do it, somebody will run you. They're going to say, so-and-so told me to tell the bank it's worth $150,000. And then they made me sign the separate agreement. Well, if there's a smoking gun and they go, I tell you what, give me that information and I'll give you immunity. And then I'm going to go run the other person under the bus. They're going to run you on the bus, and you have no wiggle room. Once they have documentation you did on this, and by the way, your texts, your emails, and then if you do a separate private contract and the buyer has it or the seller, they're going to run you under the bus to cover their butt. And I see this going on, and it seems to become quite prolific lately. So please be aware of that. And let me run through some questions and we'll jump on the lives here. So let's see here. Okay, let me jump down. And you buyer trashes. So Emerald asks, on a lease option, what if the buyer causes a large amount of damage? Well, number one, hopefully you got a substantial down payment enough. And if you do your vetting and your screening good enough, you typically avoid people like this because people like this do this all over and over. So if you run a background check, cost you 30, 35 bucks. There's companies you can use online that will do all this for you. So you have to vet people. So it doesn't mean just because there's no bank qualifying, but you will qualify that the renter doesn't have any open lawsuits. They don't sue landlords for a living, and they don't trash properties, and they don't have any evictions against them. So you just got to protect your interest as best as you humanly possibly can. So, and here's my favorite, Emerald ask. Emerald's asking a lot of creative financing questions, which I love. How do you take a subject to property? Wait, how do you take subject to with a property, with a probate property exactly? Same way. Here's the only difference in probate. What's your biggest objection on a probate? On like any deal when you do a subject to? They're always worried about, are you going to, well, what happens if you don't pay me? You're never going to get that question on probate because who's the loan under? It's usually under the person that's already deceased. So you can't chase a dead person around. I know that's terrible, but it's the truth. So they are more prone to do it than any other. So how do you get someone to sign for it? Whoever the PR or the personal representative or the executor, they have the same authority to sign as the deceased person once they're appointed by the courts. And if they agree to it, they'll do it. Why would they do it? Think about it. It's super fast. So say they're selling a property for $200,000, okay? And say there's a $170,000 mortgage. They're going to want $30,000 of equity. Are you like, oh my God, I don't have 30,000. You're right. You don't need to have 30,000. Even if you have 30,000, I don't want you to use it. Go find a cash buyer that wants to buy that property or any type of investor and say, listen, all you got to do is leave X amount. I would have them leave $50,000 up front. Okay. 30 grand goes to the PR, 20 grand goes to me. And then they can take over the rest subject to the existing loan. It's that simple. The only replacement is the PR or the executor replaces the normal seller. So